I'm Jake,
I'm Tom.
and we are Velocities of Music. Here today to talk about the resurgence of vinyl records. Tom, you may or may not be one of the most prolific record collectors I've ever met.
Well, that's interesting considering I've actually only been buying records for probably about 4.5 years now.
Mm-hmm.
But it is something that I pursue pretty aggressively. I mean, anytime I get a chance to go to a record store and look around, dig through some old dusty crates, I sure do.
I remember when you first got your first record player,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember that very specifically because I think it was the record player was given to me. And I made a decision at that point that I did not want to start collecting records. So I gave the record player, which was a gift to me from a friend, to Tom, who's a mutual friend of ours. And Tom graciously accepted said record player and immediately went out and started buying records.
It was kind of one of those, you realize what you're doing, right?
Right.
Like, you know what you're starting.
Yeah, unleash the beast sort of thing, right?
Right.
Yeah, and it was a very conscious decision to me to not collect, to not start a record collection at that moment. And it caught me off guard because, here you're gifted a record player, which is actually like, if you could ever give somebody the gift of a record player, what an awesome gift.
Yeah.
And so to me, like, that was, I was honored to like be gifted this record player, but at the same time I knew it was like this heavy weight on my shoulders because I knew that if I started buying records, I was going to go nuts.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to go, become obsessed with digging through dusty bins of records and trying to find the records of my favorite artists, of my favorite albums, which, Tom and I publish prolific lists of our favorite records, our favorite albums, and trying to collect all of them on vinyl would be, quite honestly, it'd be expensive and time consuming. And I knew that just where I was in my life, like, I did not want to start going down that path right now. Tom, on the other hand, saw that as a challenge and said, sign me up, baby.
Yep, you just plunged me right into that. And I knew that it was something that I was just going to go nuts with once I got started on, and I sure did. But it actually was something that I had been considering, wanting to do for quite some time. I just needed that push, and I think that's what gave that to me, is because I wasn't really sure where to begin. But it's a great kind of culture, and it's almost a lifestyle. Like, I don't want to get that like crazy about it, but I mean, just as you continue to learn about it, there's so many things that I didn't know 4 years ago that I do now about the nuances of record collecting, just the little things, and it's really been a lot of fun to research. And I think the reason I wanted to, like, I consciously made the decision before I started buying records that I wanted to do that, because to me it just felt like the epitomal way of manifesting one's love for music. Like, It just, like, I wanted to dedicate that to myself. I wanted to walk the walk and actually do that. And I'm really glad I did. I haven't looked back.
Yeah, and earlier when I said that, you have this huge collection, I would actually back that up. Because you guys, as far as, like, the music fanatic
right
goes, you are probably nowhere near some of the crazy people who've been collecting records since the 70s and 80s.
Oh, absolutely.
Much
thousands
larger,
and thousands
of records, right?
I've got probably in the wheelhouse of around 600 records,
right?
Which I think is pretty good for having been avidly, buying them for between 4 and 5 years. Mm-hmm. I think that's pretty good. To think that maybe 4 or 5 years from now I'll have, double that is pretty cool to me.
What are some things you've learned about record buying and that you would prescribe to someone who's just getting into it?
A lot of that I've learned really more recently is just how really paying attention to the things that matter, kind of figuring out what's important, what's not. Especially with the quality of a record, quality of a pressing, the fact that different pressings can really sound different depending on where they were pressed, when, if they're reissues, versus original versions, original pressings of a record, those things can make such a difference. And even the source material for the pressing, is it being pressed from an analog master, if it's an old record that was recorded on analog, like a reel-to-reel, or is it pressed from a cheap ripping of a CD? You hear sometimes about vinyl rips like that just don't end up being very good quality at all, and there's a lot of disagreement about the value really of albums that are recorded digitally being played on vinyl, and really, the benefit kind of goes down if you want to keep something that was recorded analog on analog if possible, because in any step of a translation like that, you're going to lose some quality. There's a lot of terminology that goes into it too. There's a lot of care, a lot of things that you can buy, record cleaning materials, brushes. There's something.
Do you get
out
into
there.
all that?
Not quite as much as some people. I mean, I'm starting to. My wife got me a record brush for my birthday, which I love because it's just great to get dust off of them and clean them off before you play them. But there are even more extreme things than that. I've seen products out there that clean your records with water, like kind of a water jet type thing.
Sure.
People have all sorts of also just DIY kind of homemade ways of doing that. So there's just a lot to it, and it's fun to read about and fun to be a part of.
How important is having a good record shelf?
A good record shelf.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's nice to be able to organize your records and also do so in a way that's aesthetically pleasing within your household.
Sure.
Because it's as much, to me, kind of a conversation piece and a work of art, really. Just all the artwork, all the way that you organize your shelves and organize your records. Like it's nice to have something that fit all of them in one place and still look good with within your home. So.
One thing I love about your record shelf, and it's an idea, I don't know if it's your idea originally, but I know that a couple of our friends who also collect records have started using this idea, but you have a music holder on top of your record that you place the case of the record that's playing in. Mm-hmm. So when you're playing, you have the
kind of a display thing. It goes along with the, that kind of, that aesthetic quality of it. To me, I also love the artwork on records, so it's a way to display that, show what you're listening to. It also, the way that came about for me was just because I had an old guitar stand that I wasn't using, and I just thought, hey, I bet I could put a record on here and display it.
Mm-hmm. So why now? Why is vinyl becoming such a big deal in 2015? Because if you think about it, vinyl really disappeared, or it certainly took a back seat a long time ago, as cassettes took over, and then in the 90s when CDs came out and really dominated, and then in the 2000s when CDs have been virtually replaced, and not entirely, but virtually replaced by digital downloads.
Mm-hmm.
Like Spotify is what I use for most of my music, right?
Sure.
I am a monthly subscriber to Spotify, and don't tell them this, but I'd pay them more if they asked for it because it's such a valuable service to me. But I keep all my albums in Spotify. Mm-hmm. And, there's millions and millions of people out there doing the exact same thing. Why, when all of this, for relatively cheap, $10 a month, I can have every album, virtually every album ever made at my fingertips to listen to for the price of $10 a month? Why would I ever want to go spend money on buying a physical object that takes up space in my house, that cost more money than a month of Spotify? Why would anyone ever do that? Why is it happening in 2015? Because record sales have gone up year after year after year the past few years. I think I think in a few years ago, in 2007, it was like $55 million for gross record sales, and in 2012, it was $171 million, which just shows you how quickly it's growing.
Mm-hmm. So that is the question, right? That's why now? Why are people doing this? And that's what I want to dive into. So let's dive into it. All right. So first, I think that what we have to agree on as kind of a starting point, as kind of a precedent, is that if people are spending money on something like records, that is a conscious statement. Well, maybe not conscious. Maybe a lot of people don't put it as explicitly as this, but I think it is making a clear statement that the alternatives that are available to me do not make up for this, do not replace this service, this product that I can buy. So, I'm a Spotify user as well. I love Spotify. But the fact that I buy records says, well, to me, that service of $10 a month, while I do get an extreme amount of value from it, it doesn't completely make up for the act of buying music in a physical media.
Right.
So then, that just brings up another question. Well, why is that? And I won't pretend to answer that for everybody. I can answer that for myself. And I think that a lot of people who buy records will probably agree with me to some degree, but at the same time, I'm not assuming to represent a majority here. But to me, it comes down to two main arguments that you can make in favor of records. And the first of those is sound quality. I actually think I've come to the belief that I think that's a weaker argument. And I'll explain why. But you will hear a lot of people, if you ask, why do you buy records? They'll say just a simple, well, it's almost like a buzz phrase by now, but they'll just say, it sounds better. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are a lot of qualifiers you need to add to that.
Well, I will say this. When I've listened to 9 Inch Nails, The Downward Spiral with you on your record player with the speakers blaring, it does actually sound better.
It does. It does. And that's why the qualifier I would put on that is it can sound better. Mm-hmm. But the issue there is that there are so many more variables. So many variables. So let's compare and contrast. If we're listening to something on Spotify, or even say we're listening to something on CD,
sure,
those digital versions have become somewhat standardized. You have your standard digital version of The Downward Spiral, for example. You just brought that album up. So anyone who's listening to the Spotify version is essentially listening to exactly the same thing. The only variables there are really what speakers are you listening to them on. With records, you can go through every single step of the chain. The pressing matters. You know, there'll be a lot of reissues that sound actually noticeably different than original pressings, than other reissues or other repressings, depending on the country they're pressed in, the time, the label who did them. You know, there's that physical aspect driving the music. All of a sudden, the physicality becomes much more important. Even the same pressings, you know, just depending on where, how they've been exposed to the elements and heat, how scratched they are, how much they've been played, you know, these things matter over time. Mm-hmm. So at the very source of the sound itself, you have that as a variable. From there, how good your needle is matters. How good the cartridge is matters. The wiring in your record player. That then goes to an amplifier, and the quality of the amplifier matters. And then, of course, you end with the speakers, and the quality of the speakers matter immensely. And if you have any of those pieces of the chain that are weaker, will naturally yield a different result. So what frustrates me to see is people saying, well, I tried listening to a record and I thought it sounded awful. Well, was it an old scratched up crappy record? Mm-hmm. Was it a shitty set of speakers? Was it a $10 crappy little turntable that no one even bought when they were new? I mean, there are a lot of things that play into that. I would say also, while this seems up front to be a very objective matter, mm-hmm. the actual sound quality, you think, well, sound quality is something that can be scientifically measured, right? And to a degree, that's true. Of course, scientifically, a 320 kilobyte per second MP3 should sound better than a 128 kilobyte per second MP3. Sure. That's just science, right? But really, the way that our ears pick up these nuances and these differences are more subjective than I think people want to realize. Some people whose ears have been trained will just hear these differences much more than other people. And that's something that I don't want to underplay, because that's really important. Just how we hear music is a very subjective experience, even if it's coming from the same source, based on what we've heard before, based on the way that our ears are shaped, just our body physiology, right? That's a big part of it. So while I do think that argument is still sound, I don't.
You see what you did there?
Oh my gosh, that wasn't even on purpose.
No
pun intended.
No.
You give me too much credit. I can't. I'm not that smart, man. Come on. But while the sound quality thing is important, I think it is kind of a weak argument, just because there's more subjectivity than people want to realize. The thing too is, to me, it's like, is that really a reason to spend a bunch of money on something? Because let's compare once again with Spotify, and I'll use my own experience for this. So I'm not trying to compare one vinyl enthusiast's experience to another Spotify listener's experience. I'm saying that all coming from me as representing both of those parties. So it is kind of a house divided within myself. But so I listen to Spotify a lot in my car on the way to work, right? That's my go-to between work. I've got like a 15 to 20 minute drive to and from work, and I listen to Spotify. Now, my car is a 94 Oldsmobile Beater with the worst stereo system you could probably imagine, factory 94 Oldsmobile speakers. I have a tape deck, which I have one of those adapter things, where the tape converts to the 3.5 millimeter auxiliary audio cable.
Right.
I plug that into my phone and I stream Spotify on my way to work.
Ghetto blasting.
Oh, absolutely. Ghetto as hell. And but the thing is, I don't care.
Sure.
I'm on my way to work for 15 to 20 minutes. I don't need an audiophile experience. I just want to hear the songs that I know and love to get my morning going on my way to work. I'm not sitting there bitching about audio quality. It doesn't matter because that's not the function that it serves.
Right.
At the same time, I don't think that anyone out there has ever listened to a song on a CD or streaming over Spotify and gone, I don't really like this. And then they hear it on vinyl and they go, oh my gosh, this is amazing. What it comes back down to is songwriting. That's still, to me, the most important. So if you like a song, you're going to like a song. And to me, that higher sound quality experience can heighten that. It can breathe new life into a song that maybe you already know. But chances are, I mean, like I said, I've never heard someone take that stance. And if I did, I'd probably slap them.
Right.
Because to me, they're just listening to music for the wrong reasons, in my opinion, at that point. And especially me as a musician, while production is important, I would think that any other musician would be offended by the thought of, I didn't like your song at first, and then I heard it on vinyl and it just sounded great. And it's like, well, that's good, but production always should come second fiddle to the songwriting.
Right.
And that's really what the sound quality of vinyl can bring out. Jake, I remember one distinct time when I was showing you how my Talking Heads Remain in Light record sounded. And you and I both independently, because I remember thinking this before I showed it to you, and then you said the exact same thing. We were listening to track 3 on that album, The Great Curve, and there are those horn blasts.
Right.
And I remember you saying, like, oh my gosh, you can just hear the reverb on those horn blasts so much, like the tail as the decay on the reverb comes off. You could hear it much better than you can on any other
Very
system.
distinctly.
Absolutely.
Right.
And we both had that experience. We both had that response. And so it's kind of that, independent opinion, that validation of it. Get an independent source, to check your facts. And it was really cool to see that you picked up on that as well, because that's something that I'm very attuned to when I'm listening to records. And that's something that I notice probably more than anything in terms of sound quality difference is just a better sense of the spatial aspects of the sound. You get a much more 3D feel. You get much more of the extremes in the high end and the low end. I feel like I get a sense of placement where if I was putting every instrument in a room when I'm listening to a record, I can really do that as opposed to the compressed digital nature of MP3s. And I do notice that in music that I love and already know, I pick up on little things when I'm listening to it on vinyl that I never heard before. But the reason I have it on vinyl is because I already liked it anyway.
Right.
So that to me, it's a factor, but I think if you're really trying to convince someone, I don't think it's the best place to go.
Sure.
The second big reason for me, and what I think is a better argument, is just the act of buying music, the act of looking through records and buying them is a fun and nostalgic experience.
Sure.
And that's something that is a much more amorphous kind of subjective argument. Because at that point, you're comparing people's experiences and priorities in life, things that they enjoy, that you really can't put your finger on.
Right.
But in a way, while I think some people would see that as a weaker argument or point of view, I actually think it's stronger for that reason.
Absolutely.
Because it becomes a deeply personal thing that you can't quantify,
right. Well,
that you can't compare between two people.
What we're really talking about is emotion.
Right.
People, like, emotional resonance when listening to music is something that's why I listen to music, right? It's whether even if it's something that's incredibly heady, like math rock or something that I'm listening to, and I'm just kind of listening to it for the joy of the technicality, right?
Yeah.
There's still some sort of emotional happiness that brings me,
Absolutely.
right? There's some sort of an emotional connection to the music I'm listening to, right? And there's something about digital music that just leaves us longing for ownership, right? And we don't feel like it's like we're observers on the musical process today. Whereas in maybe this like slowly happened over time, and like we're just starting to realize it. But like when I scroll through my hundreds and hundreds of albums that I've saved in Spotify, which Spotify is wonderful software. I can't say enough about it, but I have, it doesn't take anything for me to search for an album and then click save.
Yeah.
It takes nothing. Right. But also with that, like, it doesn't have to be something that I like. It's no additional cost to me. So none of my hard earned dollars are getting spent on that.
Mm-hmm.
I can't thumb through the book.
Yeah.
And I know that they make digital CD booklets or whatever.
Yeah, because scrolling through a PDF that's really
it's really a great experience.
Hits me right in the feels scrolling through a PDF.
Right, it's really a great experience. But like when you have a record, right? When you purchase a record, especially whether it's new or old or whatnot, you are using your dollars to vote for that artist. You're saying this artist deserves to do more music, right?
Yeah.
Deserves for more people to get into this music, because your dollars essentially are your capitalist votes, right?
Yeah.
And that has value because you feel like emotionally you're more connected to the album because you can physically hold it, touch it, open up the artwork, and go through it, read the lyrics on the album, on the booklet pages. Yeah. And it's such a more physical experience, which it's a real experience.
Absolutely.
It resonates with your emotions.
There's
more.
something, and I think that anymore the technology and practicality of it tries to take over just our basic human psychology and instinct. And people can try to say, oh, well, we got all this music streaming, and yeah, that's great, but does it replace everything that music does for us psychologically?
Right.
And to me, just the answer is no. I read, based on something you said just a moment ago, with the physicality of it and really having something, ownership, I read a great article. It was an interview of Alice Cooper. And I'll kind of paraphrase, since I don't remember word for word exactly what he said, I'll paraphrase what I took away from it, and I thought he had some really great points. Someone posed him the question, why are people buying vinyl today? And he said, very straightforward, it's because I think kids are getting sick of buying air. Of paying for something that's not tangible.
Oh, rebellion.
Right. And there is a rebellious aspect to that, which I think is interesting, because every generation wants something to kick against.
Right.
They want to kick against the norm. And even if the norm is something great that the previous generation sees as a gift, they're looking for something more. So, Jake, our kind of 90s generation, I remember growing up buying cassettes when I was very young. My family finally got a CD player. I started buying CDs.
You joined a CD club, I'm sure. I was in like 3.
Right, yeah.
Savage Garden, Natalie and Bruglia. It was just it was a discount.
90s forever, right? Yeah. So, that to me is a very meaningful experience. Right. And when I remember when downloading and streaming first kind of started, and I loved that too. I was into that because it was kind of a cool alternative to what we had gotten so used to doing. But now I think where with the generation that the downloading and the streaming is the standard, I think they realize that there's something lacking and they want something more physical. What Alice Cooper mentioned is he said, I felt like back in the day, when someone bought one of my records, they were buying a piece of me. Like they were buying something that I created that they could look at and hold and say, I've got this Alice Cooper record. And it's just a much more disconnected, impersonal experience when you're just searching for something to stream. I mean, I know, I mentioned I listen to music in the car on the way to work. I spend the entire time showering in the morning thinking about what I'm going to listen to, because the options are endless and it's almost like mental overload. You have so many options that I can't even think of what to listen to. But I love going to my record collection and looking at this, pretty good size, but still limited and finite options of what I can listen to, and there's some comfort in that. It brings me back to the days when I'd flip through my CD booklet and find something I wanted to listen to there, and I had a much more thorough and intimate understanding of what I had available to me. There's something to be said for that.
Absolutely.
Well, I guess you could say, why records then? Why not CDs? Why don't people just keep buying CDs? I actually read an article on Pitchfork I thought had a really good stance on that, because they were covering this topic as well. And I think that the writer for Pitchfork said something along the lines of, CDs are something that have always just looked like cheap office supplies anyway. They're nice and they're functional, and especially for the time that they were really popular, they serve their purpose, but really what it comes down to, it's a flimsy piece of plastic.
Right. And the cases always break.
Right.
The print on the booklet is so small you can barely read it. You can't really do anything creative with it.
Exactly. So if you're going for a physical music experience anyway, might as well go to records. And the other thing that you touched on there, which is the sheer size of it, it's great. But there was a comic, like a little cartoon going around the internet a while back that I still see from time to time. That's just kind of a one panel thing, and it's got a guy saying to another guy, "Yeah, I got into collecting records mostly for the cost and inconvenience." And it's kind of fun. It's a funny kind of tongue in cheek poke at why people do it. But the funny thing is I don't see either of those things to be factors. Buying records really isn't that expensive if you don't want it to be.
Right.
If you don't want to spend $40 on a record, you don't.
Right.
I mean, for me. And these things will be different by different people. I mean, that's just naturally, you put your money where your mouth is, right? You buy things that you care about.
Sure.
The only time I've ever spent $40 on a record was when the Magic Whip came out, the new Blur album. I coughed that up because, to me, once again, that's an experience.
It's a dollar vote.
Right. I have been waiting for that album to come out for 12 years. Right. And it finally did, and that was fine with me.
Totally.
Other than that, I mean, I pretty much never spend more than $15 or $20 on a record. I'm a bargain shopper.
Right.
That's part of the fun for me is digging through and finding those deals. Maybe I'm not even buying the records that I like the most, but I find a good value.
Yeah.
And that's really cool to me. So, I don't see it as an expensive hobby because it's only as expensive as you let it get.
And that right there is a very big difference between your personality and my personality. And one of the reasons why I chose not to pursue record collecting is, for one thing, I hate bargain hunting. I find it to be a taxing chore.
That's fair.
It's just not something that I get a lot of happiness from, right? And the other thing is I love collectathons. Whenever I play video games, my favorite video games are always like your Banjo-Kazooie or your Mario 64, so where you just collect things.
You just like hoard them.
Yes. Yeah. Is the whole point is just to collect things. And with records, I would pursue it in the same, I would pursue it with the same level of aggression, I guess. Like, I'm going to go.
Zeal.
Yes. I'm going to go capture all of these records. My top 100 albums. I want all of them on vinyl.
I think you just played too much Pokemon. It's that gotta catch 'em all mentality.
Oh, so you could actually make like records in Pokemon form. So where it's like, a wild Led Zeppelin appeared.
New business opportunity for you, Jake.
All right.
Go ahead and follow.
Right. We got to stop this podcast right now so I can go do that.
But you make a great point there that it depends on your personality. Sure. It depends on how you get into it. I would never pass judgment on someone else for what they're willing to spend on something because that's their money and it's their choice to do what they want with it. For me, I like that bargain hunt. I don't like just getting online and finding an album and ordering it unless I know I'm never going to be able to find it anywhere else.
Another benefit of collecting records is whoever wants to buy you a gift at either Christmas or your birthday or for some other random occasion, they always have a go-to gift idea, right? It's easy.
Yeah, they can just ask my wife, hey, does Tom have this record? She can go check out my very cleanly alphabetized, set of records, see if I have it, tell them yes or no. Yeah, right. It's great. I love getting gift cards and stuff for that too. But, it just...
So if you want to give Tom a gift, you know what to do now.
Right. But it harkens back to, my experience when I was a kid, digging through CDs and always looking for that cheapest used CD that I wanted, that I didn't have. I mean, it's an experience that, once Hastings here in Ames, Iowa closed, that there was a void, there was an emptiness in me that I really needed to replace with something, and buying records has really done that. So, I love whenever I'm traveling, I look up to see if there's a record store nearby, and I've been to record stores all over the country. They're all different. They're all very interesting.
It seems like it really comes down to just records feel more human.
Oh, absolutely.
Whereas, the whole buying air analogy, like, when you're saving albums and listening to them on Spotify, or you have all these digital downloads, what does that mean? Like, you're hearing it, and that's great, and you can obviously still have that emotional connection to the album. But if you want to 10x that emotional connection, you really have to connect it to something that you feel you own. I mean, I really think that's kind of the last step, right? If you really want to get the most out of your music, you have to have a piece of ownership in it, skin in the game, right?
Sure.
Warrant, what we always talked about in album reviews.
Yeah, absolutely. There is another side of this too that I want to dive into real quick. and that's just the economic impact of it. I've been reading a lot of articles saying that there's this vinyl bubble that's going to burst. What they're seeing as a problem is that demand keeps rising, but really when it comes down to it, supply is more limited than you think, simply because the machines that make these are somewhat archaic. They're not being kept up. People are trying to find and repair them all the time, but a lot of the people who know how to repair them, are not really around anymore. So it's difficult there too, and a lot of indie labels are suffering because people want to buy vinyl, and they'll put orders in for vinyl for something from their from their label that's going to be released in another 3 or 4 months, and they can't get the shipment fulfilled for 9 months. And at that point, it's greatly impacting them from a economical standpoint. So like that's too bad to see. That's kind of a shame. But at the same time, I hope to see that things level out. What it's also caused is it's caused really a lot of people to be out of touch with just what the market is like.
Right.
So I was in Bozeman, Montana a few weeks ago, and I found out that there were a couple record stores just down the block from where I was staying. So I went and checked them out. And the first one that I went to had the most grossly overpriced records I've ever seen. And like I said, I've been to a lot of record stores. I feel like I have a pretty good feel for what records should cost. I've got a copy of Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young's Deja Vu that is in pretty good shape. I think I paid like $4 for it, right? It's a pretty popular, pretty common record. They had this store had this record there in worse shape than mine, and I think they were selling it for $15. I couldn't find a single used record there for under $10. Most of them were $15 to $20, and anything new was above $30.
Well, it is Bozeman, Montana.
That's
right?
true, and there certainly is, location and geography plays a part in it, but the thing that just absolutely flabbergasted me about this store is I found a copy of Neil Young's Harvest in awful condition. There was wax spilled on the cover. Like I thought it looked like mold when I first looked at it, and then I realized it was like dried wax that someone had spilled on the cover of this copy of Harvest, and they were selling it for $24. I would have expected that to be $2 or $3. It's a common, easy to find record. I see the same thing with Michael Jackson's Thriller all over the place. I see people on Facebook posting, this person was trying to sell Thriller for $80 to $100, and it's like because it's a popular record, they think they can get that much out of it. But because it's such a popular record, it means it was pressed millions of times.
Right.
And you
Supply
can
and
find it
demand.
anywhere.
Right.
Exactly. And people are out of touch with that market aspect of it. So it's an interesting time because I think that people are starting to catch on to this, but they're picking up on it and they're pursuing it before the knowledge is actually there to be able to sell it appropriately, and that's kind of interesting to see.
Now, do you expect that the growth we've seen over the last few years in the vinyl resurgence, do you expect this to continue for it to grow? Will it plateau? You talked about the bubble, the vinyl bubble bursting. I mean, that's rather unlikely, but what do you expect, Tom? Do you expect? I mean, obviously, you're going to keep buying records.
I am, and it's tough to say because I think that it'll really take an unforeseen outside impact to really change the trajectory. I think that things will keep growing. I think that it'll plateau a bit or maybe even dip down slightly if it gets to the point where that demand has surpassed our limit of supply because of the just resource limitations that I mentioned. I could see things going down because I think what'll happen is vinyl will just become more expensive. Right. People won't buy it as frequently, but then again, that'll be slightly made up for by the fact that I think more people will be buying it. But I think it'll really I think it's a generational thing. I think it depends on what alternatives are out there. Like I said, I think people saw streaming as a full-out alternative, got hooked on that, and then realized, well, maybe this didn't actually make up for everything that I liked about buying music. So I think it'll take another alternative to come along if it's a more practical physical medium, or if it that fulfills all the same kind of primal needs that us music buyers have. Or it'll just be, something else entirely, some other kind of streaming service. There are a lot of music vinyl clubs. I'm a part of one where I get a record every month. That's a lot of fun. And I think more things like that will come up that will only bolster the enthusiasm before it really starts to decline. Right. But, I don't necessarily think it'll last forever, but who cares? That's not the point.
Right.
You know, it's these things change all the time. Look at how quickly the popular medium changed between, you know, from records to tapes to CDs. You have 8 tracks somewhere in there, you know. I mean, and that's only within the last 30 or 40 years.
Right.
Like, that's not even that long.
Right.
I mean, wow, consider that. You know, things are changing not even every 10 years.
Right.
So, you know, maybe it won't last forever, but I plan on keeping my record collection, and even if they become harder to find and fewer people are buying them, I'm still going to enjoy mine.
For sure. What's your favorite record you've purchased?
Well, I do. You know, my favorite record of all time is The Downward Spiral, and I do have that on vinyl.
Mm-hmm.
Probably my favorite single, like pressing, like favorite find in the wild, is probably when I was in Washington D.C. visiting my brother, and I found an old pressing of Metallica's Kill 'Em All, and it's in great shape, and it even has a couple of, you know, bonus tracks, Am I Evil and Blitzkrieg. It's one of the earlier, not original pressings, but one of the earlier pressings that has those 2 tracks on it as well. And to me, that was just, you know, that was like a collector's item for me. I love Metallica. I love that album, so I do enjoy putting that one on.
And every time you put that one on, you get to experience all of those emotions over
right,
again.
Exactly.
The thrill of the find.
I had that album on cassette when I was very young. I had it on CD. Now I've got it. Now it's almost, you know, moving forward, I take a step back and now I have the vinyl of it, and it just kind of comes full circle, you know?
Yeah, very true. That's a good question for all of our listeners too. You know, why do you buy records? How many do you have in your collection? And what is your favorite record in your collection? Tom and I desperately want to know these things because we think that, you know, obviously a lot of you care a lot about music. Otherwise you wouldn't be listening to this podcast. And you know, it's a very emotional and powerful thing. We believe that records add a lot of emotional value and really help you 10x your collection of music and your music appreciation. So we're really interested to see what your guys' thoughts are. Next week, or later this week maybe, we're going to talk about what makes a good concert in our next podcast. So stay tuned. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music, and we are moving music discussion forward.